Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to do some garden task here in the Raleigh, North Carolina garden, just getting ready for the upcoming season. I got to get some compost down in a few of our annual beds and do a little bit of pruning. Talk about a few things out here, types of pruning as we go in this video. Yesterday's video, 2 days ago video, as you're watching this, we introduced this new garden space that we're using from the city of Raleigh's space over there that we're going to have a native garden over there. That content I started a playlist for called, what did I call it? I called it Native Garden. So that everything that's going to go in that series of video will be in a single playlist if you're interested in following along with that as it happens, if you haven't seen that video yet. We're going to be transplanting a couple of things out of here over there in the next few weeks, and then we've got a lot of traveling we're going to be doing, gathering up some things that we're going to go in that garden and in this garden. So let's get started on some things we have going on here. Our dwarf hinoki cypress. So this dwarf hinoki cypress, I guess, has been in the ground. This will be its fourth spring probably stuff. So it's 3 years in the ground at this point. And it's put on a decent amount of growth as we would expect. The thing with dwarf conifers is they're just slower growing overall. They're still going to end up with a little bit of size on them regardless. But occasionally on these dwarf conifers, we get a sport of the original hinoki cypress. And so that's what this is. You can see this more vigorous piece that's growing in here. Basically, somebody found a broom or, witch's broom like this on a hinoki cypress, cut it out, rooted it, and then, this is what we get as a dwarf hinoki cypress. But occasionally, it will come back out with its original growth like this. You'll see this in variegated plants, maybe where we'll get the green growth will come back. Something will come back in it, but you need to get these things out quicker, very quickly. Otherwise, this in a very, very short period of time, including here in the winter, it's actually put on some growth in we saw this, and within a month or two of having talked about it, it grew this much, because keep in mind, it's on the root system of a very well-established plant down there. So it's able to take that energy pretty quickly. But we want to take anything like this and go back as far as we can find it, down into the plant, as far as we can get back in there, and make sure we're hopefully getting all of it out. Again, that may come right back out, but we'll see. It's easy to cut out. Literally, I just did 3 minutes of talking about something that took, 2 seconds to fix. So a lot of times it's a matter of just walking by, making that cut, and then if it comes back, it comes back, but it'll be a long time before I'd have to deal with it again. But it's 3 seconds worth of work and 4 minutes worth of Jim's running his mouth. But let's bounce to the next thing. Actually, one more thing before I move on. I'll take something like this and just cut it into pieces right here while I'm standing here. Again, I'm gonna add another, good pair of pruners. I added another 5 seconds worth of work to this, and I'll just allow it to mulch. I'll allow it to mulch itself. As long as it's not diseased material that we're taking off of it, it can just be the mulch, for itself going forward. So again, if I have to come by here again and cut something off, I'll cut it into 4 pieces, throw it under it, keep walking. This time of year, some of our clematis, and I'll go ahead and say clematis before anybody corrects me, clematis, some of them get cut and some of them don't. They're in different groups. And this sweet summer love clematis is one that blooms on new growth. And we hope it blooms on new growth. This thing's been in the ground for 3 years and we've yet to see a flower on this thing. So I've been underwhelmed by this one so far, but we know the first year that they go in the ground, they just have to gather some energy up and get going. So I didn't expect it in the first year. I expected a few flowers last year and didn't get any. So this is one of those things I've talked about. If there's something in your garden that's not really making you happy, it's not performing the way it should, you can either cut it hard. This I'm going to cut hard regardless because this is the way you handle this plant. But something else, I might cut it hard, see if it comes back out from it. I might try to move something. Maybe it's in too much shade into the sun, or it's in too much sun into the shade, whatever. Give it one opportunity. And then if it still doesn't impress me, it's out of here, because I just don't have time to spend 80% of my time worrying about 20% of the plants in the garden. But this particular one is in group 3. So they're in groups. The group 3 clematis bloom on new wood, and so that we can cut them very hard back in the late winter. So I've got this it had come on this little trellis that we've never taken out, and we've got this much growth on it last year, so it grew like crazy. Just again, it didn't flower. I'm going to get back in here and cut this back to about 1 foot in height, and they're opposite buds on each side of the stem. There's a bud, so I want to cut it right down to where there's a set of buds right at the top of my cut that I'm leaving behind. I've got 3 main trunks coming out of the ground, and I'm going to leave all 3 of those just about 1 foot high with, again, buds in place. And so Steph can probably come over here a little bit closer, and I'll get rid of this trellis at the same time. But somewhere anywhere along here, I'm going to have buds on both sides of these branches that will come out, that will leaf out from that spot later. But I'll just come in here just like that. And so that particular one, that's how I'm going to cut it down to that. It seems pretty brutal, but that's the way you do it on these. And I'll do the same here. And I think that one is now freed up. There's actually a 4th one coming out of the ground there. I'll leave it as well. And so then here's my 3rd one right there. So I got now 4 pieces of growth coming from the ground, and the rest of this, which again seems cruel, but it's just going to go right to the compost bin, and come back out here next year and fertilize the plants in the garden. I'll tell you from experience on clematis that have been in the ground for 2 or 3 years, when you make these hard cuts on them, and I know Jack Mannii is in group 3, which is a very, very popular purple one. This one is supposed to have some fragrance to it, similar to Clematis paniculata or sweet autumn clematis, but not be as invasive as sweet autumn clematis. Sweet autumn clematis, if you have one, is also a group 3 one that you cut down like this. But one thing I know about this is it's got a fairly extensive root system on it now, and it's going to come back out of that really, really quickly. So when it starts growing, we need to be out here on top of putting it back on the fence, and I want to get it all the way down the top of the fence right here. It will grow inches a day. So if this thing comes out, you know, the first year it's in the ground, it won't do this. It'll just grow, you know, this much in a season. And then the next year, you saw how much it grew in the second season. This season, it'll likely grow 6 to 12 feet, okay, coming out of this. I need to every day or every other day come out here and just weave it a little bit more through here. Otherwise, it will just be a tangled mess, which is what you saw from what I had here from last year, where I obviously at some point didn't pay enough attention to it, and it just became a tangled mess up here on the top. But keep in mind, a well-established clematis that you cut back hard like this, it's coming out quick, and it will require some maintenance in the first few weeks when it's growing. You can see the hellebore starting to throw off some color here in the Raleigh garden. I have not cleaned them all up. Cutting back the foliage isn't necessarily 100. You don't have to 100% always cut it back, but I find that the flowers are so much more showy. That foliage from this year is going to be so much more fresh looking than it is from last year's foliage. So I like to get in here and clean them up, and I'd like to have done it just a little bit earlier than, you know, how much this has already grown from the center. If you're in zone 5, a lot of times these will have cleaned themselves up. This foliage will have not knocked back, but here in the south, they tend to, the foliage holds up through the winter. Sometimes it's a little bit more damage than it normally is here, because we've had a series of days that stayed below freezing. But again, in much colder zones, you won't even be thinking about this as much, because a lot of the foliage will have died back on its own. But I just come in here and gather these up and get them down in there as much as you'll see as I clean this up. And you can use pruners or pruning knife, whatever the heck you want to use to clean these up. As you can see, just getting that one side off, and we're gaining material here for compost. I can't get down in there quite as much as I normally would, because I let it grow a little bit more than we normally have. I showed this in a video a few weeks ago, but then I didn't come around the garden and do the rest of them. look how much better that looks. Once we get to this point, when I did it a few weeks ago, I actually threw the leaves back on top because they had barely started growing and I wanted to keep the cold off that new growth. But now we're in a spot where the worst of the winter's probably over with here, and I can go ahead and clear this out a bit. But look at that. Look how much fresher that looks. We have bulbs literally coming up everywhere, and I don't like to put a lot of foot traffic in these beds when it's really wet. Normally this time of year it would be really wet, but we're pretty dry right now. We're in a moderate drought here in Raleigh, and where we did have a little snow last week, it just really has not added up to much. It's amazingly dry out here considering this time of year. This time of year, just typically we're pretty wet, but we're not this year. I've never. In fact, we have a fire danger watch for us in this area for late January, early February is probably not something we would normally see, but trying to not crush bulbs back here. And also, okay, so the next one is epimedium. Epimedium's another one that shows off these early flowers during the season, and getting this foliage cut back and out of the way will allow those flowers to really show off. And you can see what this old evergreen perennial looks like, after some, I don't want to say significant cold. We had normal cold for once, for a few weeks. We didn't have anything super cold, but it does enough crispifying on these. These flowers would come up in here and they'd be covered up a bit by this, and they really wouldn't show off, and the background would be just kind of burnt foliage until the new foliage comes. So it's easy just to grab a handful down here and, take your pruning knife. I actually have some bulbs coming up through the middle of this as well. And just, I'll get all this out of the way, and then those flowers will come up and really show off. And then the new foliage. And here, as always, when I clean something up like this, I find a weed that I can get out of here. And I didn't get all of that, but if I'm able to get in here, and spend this much time, I can find some things that I can clean up as well. This is an area of the garden that's really, really crowded. We have the Edgeworthia, which is about to start opening some flowers pretty soon. These flower buds were on it really, really early this year, way back in November, and they're always on there then, but they were small, but they had opened more than they typically do. And so it's been I really didn't know that they'd survive some of the cold that we've had, but it looks like every single one of them's come through, and they're going to be flowering pretty soon. We want to allow this thing to get bigger here. So this cestrum that's now, when we originally planted these, they were 6 feet apart and it seemed okay, but now the cestrum is in the way. We're going to have a great space for this to go. It's very upright and narrow here in the garden. This is a dieback perennial for us, so it's an evergreen in warmer areas and unfortunately invasive in some warmer areas, but not for us here in Raleigh. Probably the longest flowering thing in the entire garden. Flowers from the time it starts flowering by late May. It doesn't stop flowering until freeze or frost knocks it back. It just blooms that entire time, and hummingbirds are on it a good portion of the season, and some other pollinators as well. But basically, we cut this thing down in the winter, and then we get like 25 suckers come up from it, and then we choose 7 or so of those, and I tie them up together so that it stays up vertical. And then in the last winter, it didn't die back because we didn't get enough cold. This winter is definitely crispified, and so I'm going to cut it down, but then we're also going to move it in a few weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and root prune it. So that's my preparation to move something. Is I'll just come in here. I'm going to come in here. Luckily on this one, for me, I can just, right below where I tied it together last year, I'm going to cut all these down. And then I'm going to be able to easily circle this thing. You don't often get this as an opportunity when you're going to move something, to be able to cut it like this, but let's see. That's about all of it, isn't it? Is that everything? And a lot of material this year for being able to make some compost, make some mulch. We could chip this up if we wanted to, or just cut it up into small pieces. If you have good pruners, it doesn't take but a second to come in here with a piece like this and, you know, cut it 3-4 times, and then you can just throw it back up under another plant if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. It'll just, oop, that's already cut. Okay, so already we got a lot more room here, don't we? And so now I'll just go ahead and prep it to move, which is literally just dig, cut the surface roots going around it. This thing's anchored in here pretty good, I think. It's about 4 years in the ground, but you see, I'm already able to move that, just 3 chops there. This is a plant, since it suckers, it's gonna unfortunately still come back up over here. I'm gonna have to cut the suckers down a few times. All I wanna do is get it where I'm moving it. And I'll cut the rest of them later when I'm ready to actually move it. Basically just cutting surface roots right now. I do have a root from a tree or something right there. Okay, I think that's good enough. It's ready to, won't take much more effort to get it out of the ground. So I'll just come in here for now and cover that back up. Got a little bit more winter to go here. And in a few weeks, when we know the worst of the cold is past, we'll go ahead and pop it out of the ground and move it. One of the most asked about plants in the garden is this Brigadoon St. John's wort that I'm about to cut back. And the reason for it is 9 months out of the year, it's this vivid, bright yellow color. Gets a few flowers like other St. John's wort, but not many. And they're very short-lived. They're yellow flowers on yellow foliage, so it's not even, doesn't even show off all that much. But this is the first winter it's actually gotten knocked back. You know, it's been more like a dieback perennial this winter, because again, we've had some actual, again, not abnormal cold, back to just kind of normal cold conditions. And so it's knocked it back last year, but no matter what, even last year when it looked okay, we cut it back because the new foliage coming out on it is superior in every way to the old foliage. You can already see some coming back down at the ground below where I'm holding that up. I mean, as soon as we get any kind of warm weather, it's going to start to regenerate some new foliage from the bottom that's going to look quite a bit better. I can run the lawnmower over this, and I have done that in the past, but I can also take my pruning knife like I was using in the front garden, or my hand pruners if I want to, or these shears, any way that you can. You can just come through here and cut this stuff, you know, back to maybe 2 inches tall. It's pretty easy to run this across the ground like that and just, you know, make a cut. You know, trying to pull it up. What I'll do is, after I've gone through here and what I think has cleaned it up, I'll take my rake and I will pull on it and see what I've missed, because I will have definitely missed some material. If it's run up in too much into someplace I don't want it, I could take that opportunity to go ahead and dig it out right now. But I don't even mind walking on this stuff. It's pretty easy to control. But there's about half of it done. Let's pull the rake through here real quick, see what we actually accomplished. See, now we've found all the places we missed. We'll get that cut back. And that's it. I mean, that's how easy this is. It's a once a year cleanup on this St. John's wort. Got another one along the driveway that I'll show you, a different one that I'll show you in another video that needs to be cut back, but we got a ton of pruning to do out here. And it's about that peak time to do it. Again, these kind of operations like this allow you to also see where your noxious weeds are coming up in the garden. This stuff can just really lay in place if you wanted to. What I'll typically do on something like this is just, I've got the shrub right behind it. I don't want to do anything with this material. I can just take it and throw it right up in there. It doesn't matter. In a few weeks, this is gonna flush back out and cover that up. If I want to just hide it, just thin it out back there. No one will ever know it was back there. And it's mulch for that loropetalum. Our Fats hedera took a little bit of damage, not as much as I would have thought, because it really was not prepared for any cold. We were so warm through the whole fall that I actually thought this would get knocked back a little more. But I'll cut about 2 feet out of the top of it ultimately. I need to reattach it a little higher up the wall here, but since I'm going to be cutting it, I don't need to do that immediately. I think overall, I mean, one thing about protecting plants, and I talk about over on the Weekly Garden Planner, about protecting plants. Plants do in time. So let's say I say something is hardy in zone 7 to 9. Let's say loropetalum would be a great example. Actually, how about this? 8 to 10 on this Fats hedera. So this would be a great example of, it's hardy in zone 8 to 10. These leafy evergreens like this, in zone 8, the first year or two, it may not be zone 8 hardy. It may not be zone 8A hardy, or 7, let's say it's supposed to be in 7B. It may not be hardy in that zone until it develops some wood, it develops some time in the ground, it develops a bigger root system, it develops some vigorous growth, and it becomes hardy in that area. So when we're talking about winter protecting plants, sometimes even the things that are supposed to be hardy in your zone, these leafy evergreens that are barely hardy in your area, for the first year or two, we protect them. So the first year or two this was in the ground here, it got a sheet over it a couple times. We had a couple nights that were mid-teens or whatever. And it's a temperature that could hurt it if it's young. But now it's seen 14 degrees, 13 degrees, several nights in the teens. And it's gotten about, probably 1.5 feet, 2 feet of what is not dieback. It's still completely alive up here, but the leaves look tough enough that I'll probably just cut it back to where they don't look tough. But my Fatsia is that way. Distilium is a great example. It's hardy in zone 7 to 9. I don't think in zone 7A, for that first 2 or 3 years, that you turn your back on it, when you get severe cold. I think it's something you need to cover, and then it becomes kind of hardy in time. We have Indian hawthorn out front that we figured the flower buds were going to be nuked on. No problem whatsoever, because it's 4 years old, but the first 2 years it was in the ground with minor cold, the leaf buds got damaged. So keep that in mind. A lot of times we need to protect things, even the things that are hardy in our area, just a couple winters, get them through that first couple winters, and then they're really kind of set after that, and shouldn't take any additional damage unless you had well below temperatures, and that's a whole nother conversation really. So there you go. There's a few things we're doing in the garden this morning, late January, tons of stuff to do like this, and we're getting started on that project over there on the other side if you're interested in following along with that. And that video was up a couple days ago if you haven't seen it yet, on the expansion here of the Raleigh garden, which is going to be a kind of a native meadow over there. So thank you guys so much for following along.